Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. So all our interviewing, my colleague Allison passed out a packet for you all. You also can get a soft copy, so you'll get one emailed to you. And you also have the slide deck. And we'll talk about what these little green sheets of paper are in a second. But just quickly, to kind of go around the room, can you just tell me your name and what year you are in school, and if you've had terrifying interview experience? I think all of them are probably terrifying at some point, but maybe the specific one that's terrifying. Like for me, I'll start off. So again, I'm Felicia Parks. I'm part of the Career Center. I actually work with the School of Communication, and my background is in that as well. Probably the scariest interview was this job because I had to do a presentation on interviewing. Which is why I'm doing this one. I had a particular resume out loud and had 7 people in the room asking me questions. So we'll start with our RA.
Yeah. I'm Danny. I'm a sophomore. And like a scary interviewing thing I had was for the RA position. Just like having a student and our voice interviewing me, asking questions for a job that I really wanted and like needed was like really scary. And like preparation for it was like pretty intense for it. Yeah.
Intense, right? Okay. And right in the back, how are you?
My name is Sophia. I'm a freshman. And
Okay.
I guess like I didn't have any interview experiences, but like I'm meeting with the important resident tomorrow, and I'm really nervous about that.
Oh, tomorrow. For what position?
It's just like a general like information.
Oh, information interview? Okay, which we treat just like an interview. So I love that you're saying that. All right. And you?
Hi, my name is Patrick. I'm a sophomore, and probably scary interview experience. I'm actually an RA as well. And that was a kind of scary interview too. Because we had to like present an object and talk about that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
This
it just
is
wasn't
pretty
just,
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what we'll do for everybody that's online, you can definitely share what's a scary session for you, and then we'll try to capture that information later. So you all have questions that are on your card. So if you can flip it over and tell me which question you have. We have one else.
It says, how did you decide on your major?
Okay. Do you feel comfortable in telling us your major and why you picked that?
Sure. So, I'm Allison, I'm a senior, and my major is psychology, but I'm also pre-med. And so then I thought that psychology would be, number one, it would be easier classes than hard science classes like physics and biochem and genetics and things like that. But also I thought it was really fascinating, and I thought it would be a great asset when I go to medical school and then, eventually treat patients, just knowing their emotional side and why they react a certain way to certain situations.
Give it up for yeah. All right, who wants to go next? We're going to clap for everybody, by the way. So don't feel like if I don't give a good answer, we're just not going to clap. No, we're going to clap for everybody. All right. Feel like you want to go. I see it in your face. Hope you don't have the same question.
I gotta tell me about yourself.
All right.
Yeah. Again, like my name's Danny. I live in Maine, right outside of Portland right now. I'm originally from Dublin, Ireland. I have lived in the US though ever since I was 5. My dad still lives in Ireland, and then I'm an accounting major and political science major here, and I'm on the club hockey team, or I'm on the E-board as well as service secretary.
I still have the accent there. Everybody clapping there. I hear it. It comes out. All right. So which one? Olivia, Nate, which one? Oh no, we're gonna give you a different question.
And Felicia, will you repeat when Olivia said, just so the folks online can hear it?
I had a problem. I'm gonna turn it upside down so you don't think I forced you to pick one. Do you have the same question?
One, yeah.
I think you did one. Oh, I'm sorry. You don't want me to kick you with the boot. Sorry. Mix them up. 2 up. All right. So Olivia, what's your question you have now?
Let's describe the team experience you found rewarding.
Describe a team experience that you found rewarding. And it could be a class project where everybody did what they were supposed to do. I know it doesn't happen. It's like a unicorn. Or it could be a work environment.
artist department, like we went on a trip together to like the theater festival.
Okay.
And we all like worked really hard on it, and then we won like gold for one act, and then we won the Spirit Award, which is really like surprising for us.
Okay.
Yeah, and then it was just really rewarding because like specifically for my school, our theater program was pretty bad. We didn't want to get any support or money, so it was completely student funded, and we had to do rehearsals outside because we couldn't like rent out a classroom.
Okay.
And then to be able to go to a theater festival and have this have the award recognized was I think really rewarding for all of us.
So love hearing about theater. That's like herding cats, right? Trying to get everybody to do what they're supposed to do, and then you able to raise money. So everybody clap for a lady. Yeah. Yay. Last but not least, in our room here.
So my question is, how well do you work with others? I would say I enjoy more interactive group work than individual work. I can't really, I don't know if I can personally attest to like whoever I work with, but I think I work well with others, and I enjoy, you know, working with other people and connecting with people to create like a larger goal or
Okay.
something.
So how well do you work with others? And for you, is creating a larger goal. So,
Yeah, just like having a shared goal and getting to that.
a shared
support
goal.
of
I
other
like that.
people.
All right, everybody clap. Yay. So we're gonna go to our slides. I'm gonna switch because I moved my slides around. This is the kind of crazy stuff I do to myself. And now I don't know what order they're in. Thank you. All right. So everybody already knows the purpose of the interview. And it sounds like you all had some scary RA interviews. I didn't know that serious. It's pretty interesting. But the employer is really trying to get a sense as to like, I saw the resume, or maybe I met you at an event, and I want to hear more. So they don't bring everybody in for an interview. So it actually is a way to celebrate and say, it's just up to me to share information. Now, for you, your whole goal, people forget that part. You want to see if you even like working with, or if you like working with that particular person. So it's a shared experience, but you also get to talk about like what it is that you can do to make impact. That's the whole goal behind the interview. It's a shared experience. And there's so many different interview formats, right? So on the left side, I talked about just kind of what happens, the structured one versus open-ended behavioral. We'll talk about each one of those. And then the types of interview, right? So when I worked in a recruiting role, there was artificial intelligence then, which is called something totally different. It was a machine that we had at different universities that people would go to the campus and they would be there because it wasn't as advanced as it is now. But now you have sometimes these scheduled ones we'll talk about a little bit more. So interview formats, type of interviews, just to get an idea, like we're all on the same page in the room. So when I go to the next slide, it's your introduction. So part of what you have in your packet is an elevator pitch. That elevator pitch, whether you're doing your information interview tomorrow and talking about yourself, or whether it's the beginning part of that conversation of tell me about yourself, right? That now you see where that's coming in. It's your opportunity to say, here's what I have to offer, and here's what I think is amazing about me. So while I thought it was amazing that you're from Ireland and your dad still lives there, part of your elevator pitch should be about some of the skills that you bring as it relates to that particular position. So you can mix that in. And then that helps put everybody calm, because when you're talking about that, I'm like, well, I still hear the accent, and I've always wanted to visit Ireland. So maybe you put everybody at ease. Because usually there's nervousness on both sides, even from the employer. I know for me, it was that constant call or stress of, you've got to hire 10 people by yesterday, and I'm hoping I pick the right people for the interview schedule. So there was always a little bit of stress. But then you're also trying to define your brand. Your brand is who you are, and your brand can change if you're in a room full of people. Has anybody been to a networking event or a job fair, right? So if I talk to 3 different people, based on my experience, I may have different things I want to share depending on what they're looking for. So don't completely memorize it. Be flexible and think about, like, what do I have on my resume and what's not reflected on my resume? Does that make sense so far? So you have an elevator pitch there. It'll give you at least the start, like your major, what you want to pursue. There's sample ones there. Definitely personalize it and try it on a couple people. So let's look at the structured one, right? Whether it's a presentation, you talk to the company, you answer that, tell me about yourself. Usually there's a list of questions that employers will ask every single candidate that they're going to be meeting with in person, on Zoom, or via phone. And they're just trying to capture that information. And it could be multiple people like you have with the RA. It could be one-on-one. It could be what we call open-ended questions. Tell me about a little bit more about yourself. It's called an open-ended question. Okay. Versus, are you willing to work remotely? Do you have a computer to use? That's more like a yes or no. And most of the time, when people say, "Are you willing to work remotely?" Especially after the pandemic, it's like, that's the only kind of job I want to have. Is yes, I wanted to be remote. Of course, I have a computer. Who doesn't have a computer, right? So there are open-ended questions that are usually in a structured format. Most interviews have structured questions, but I just wanted to kind of bring out the open-ended questions versus the case interview. Now, this may not apply to most of you listening to your majors, because a lot of times if you're working in a consulting role and nobody really knows exactly what consulting is, because it's like, I consult to you about these chairs, or I consult to you about life. But most of the time in the business arena, you get these case questions. Some of the wild card questions that people used to ask, or we used to ask when I worked for an accounting firm, was how many McDonald's French fries were cooked and eaten in the United States last year? And you might look at me like, what kind of question is that? It's looking at your analytical skills, but you have to verbalize your answer. So you're like, oh, most people get us medium-sized fry. There's X number of McDonald's in so many corners and neighborhoods, and you're just making all this up, but you're giving them an idea. Or sometimes they have a case competition and you work with teams that you may or may not know. And that's why you see that it's common in consulting. It happens a lot if you're a public relations major. I had that experience too, and in finance interviews. So results, and you have to show people kind of what the answers are. And the cases are usually if they have a question like, Mary Jo is going away to college, doesn't have money to go to pay for tuition, but has to do X, Y, and Z. Give us some logic as to how Mary would be able to go to school and what she should do differently. Of course, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but you kind of get the idea with the case question. So behavioral, this is really fun. And that's why you have a handout about the STAR format. We'll talk about what that means in a second. So usually these interviews are a little bit longer. Anybody had an interview that was almost an hour? Any experiences on that? Did you feel like you were sweating, like they were using you for some kind of secret service where you had to go into the room? Like, did you wonder when it was going to be? So perfect. So this is where you give a story format. I'll give you an example of a behavior question. It's a really long question, so take time to listen to the whole question. Tell me about a time you worked with a difficult person or difficult circumstance. What was your experience and what was the result? How many people started answering their question before I even finished? And I said, tell me about a difficult time. You were ready to give an answer, right? So we treat questions sometimes like a tennis match. We're ready to swap that ball back. But you have to listen to the whole question. Then you have to give yourself a second. Even if you want to use a little filler word and go, oh, that's a great question about working with a difficult person, because I'm trying to calm my heart down, right? It's beating fast. I'm trying to think of a response. And then you're going to give what we call the STAR format. That stands for situation, task, action steps, results. What we never say is, I worked with a difficult team with a class project. I didn't feel as though one person was pulling their weight. I went to the professor, got them kicked off the team. The rest of us soared, did an amazing job, and we all got an A. So we can't talk about throwing people under the bus, right? We have to think about, like, how do we solve it? So the results may not always be favorable in some situations. Like, we lost the case competition, but we learned to add that answer to it. So once you start practicing the STAR response, then you'll start using it for open-ended questions. Then you can tell me about yourself. Like, oh, this situation calls for talking about this. So in your packet, just remember that you have that worksheet. So if you want to turn to that, the first part of the worksheet says, what is behavioral interviewing questions, right behind interview prep? And then behind that, it has the STAR format, kind of walking through if you have 15 seconds to answer the question. Typically, I say 30 to 45 seconds. Starting with a STAR, a who, and then the what, and then walking through that part. So that's something where you can kind of fill out. And then I have on there like the website and the sample response. So definitely take a look at that. And for those of you online, you'll definitely have the soft packet to take a look at. So this is more of the STAR. So that's what's in your packet as well. So each question I passed out to you all earlier, you could have actually used the STAR format of like describing what it is that you did as relates to that question, even with your major, like why you chose psychology. And you actually did a good job of walking through the STAR without realizing I was going to talk to you about the STAR technique. And you probably heard other people say, oh, talk about an action step. I mean, you've heard PAR, position, I forgot what the A and the R stands for all of a sudden, but they use all kind of acronyms. The goal is that tell an entire story. don't just tell part of the story. So they have an idea like, oh, if I'm comparing candidates that gave me a thorough answer versus ones who didn't, I feel like this person gave me a great answer. But everybody's going to have a different one based on questions. So you have an interview, you have an information interview tomorrow, but you have an interview. Have you ever wondered, like, is there a cheat sheet? Am I going to be able to figure out what questions they're going to ask me tomorrow? Has anybody had that experience? So in Handshake, you have different ways that you can determine interview questions just by looking at the job description. There's usually some type of what we call behavioral category, teamwork, communication, ability to interact in analytical situations. Those are ways to get those. So I took a position out of Handshake as of yesterday, and then I highlighted some keywords. So it happens to be a social media internship, and this is a great way to look at it, right? So what things do you see standing out that you feel like you can speak to, Jane? Which experience do you feel like you could speak to?
Publishing across social media channels.
Okay. Do you do anything like that now?
I just have social media accounts across multiple channels.
And that's fine. If you've only done it on a personal basis, do you think you could do it on a professional basis too?
I've done it for back in high school. I was a social media manager for 2 student organizations.
Okay.
Done that on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
Okay. So if you were listening, you started to answer a question about when you demonstrated use of social media. You gave us something when you worked with a organization, and that's experience as well. But now you can see how the job description gave you some clues as to how to prepare for that interview. All right. Anybody else pick out something? You look like you were looking at it, living like, I see something that I could pick out. Like, what is it that stands out to you? Oh, I had the same problem. So I apologize. I thought I had made it big enough, but I did the same thing. So, what about if I picked out outreach or research or brainstorm? Anything pop out to you when I say those 3 words? And brainstorm, by the way, is basically a bunch of people coming up with ideas and discussing why an idea is good or not and how they can decide which one they want to use. And that's okay, because I'm just kind of picking on you guys to see what your experience was so far. So look at the qualifications, look at the day-to-day, even go onto their website. Because sometimes you look at a job description and there's not much there. We've had those experiences, right? So you have to dig a little bit deeper onto their website. What do they do for their clients? What is their overall mission? And then how does that compare to your experience? So go through your resume and go, oh, you know what? I probably should have wrote this on my resume, but it's okay. They invited me for an interview, so it's all good. But this is the way I'm going to prepare for it. And one of the things, I have a son who's into theater. One of the things I remember his theater teacher always said is practice makes permanent, right? So if you write it down, it helps you to recall it. Because you can't open up that portfolio during the interview and go, I have an answer for that question. Let me find it, right? So if you write it out, if you say it out loud, if you use our big interview tool, that's also in your packet, that practice makes it a little bit easier or makes it permanent. So has anybody had an interview where they went to apply online and a video pops up and says, all right, you have a couple of hours, or they send it to you in an email and you have to answer questions and it's an actual more of an algorithm with a system. Anybody had an AI interview so far? What was your experience, Allison?
It's like an indirect experience. Like my mom was applying for a position higher up in her own company.
Okay.
And so then she was telling me all about it, and we live in a smaller house, so you could hear it. And so then I could hear her questions, and she told me that it was kind of stressful because just like the couple seconds to reflect on it, you're like, oh my gosh. But she thought it was very interesting because my mom is on the older side, so this is extremely new to her, and she thought it was very odd.
Thanks for sharing that. And the thing that's so funny, my son who had an interview with UPS, same thing. As soon as he submitted an application, and he can't use age as an excuse because I'm like, you know everything how to use it. He was like, what is this? What do we have to do this AI interview? And I have 2 hours to complete it. And he went into complete panic mode, right? So what happens a lot of times, the question will pop up. There is a counter, right? It starts counting down. Sometimes the system will let you answer the question a second time because it'll give you a chance to practice. You don't know what questions are going to pop up, but what the system is doing, especially when there's a company that has a huge number of applicants, right? they're like, okay, we get like 1,000 resumes a week. We can't talk to 1,000 people. This is our first line of defense. We sent out the AI question. And the reason why you see the lines is that it's looking at your eye contact, it's listening for your voice inflection. It also is ranking you on words you might be saying. And if you're having a panic moment, like I haven't had one, Felicia, one's coming in the pipeline. If you got one at UPS, clearly other companies are using it, right? Our tool, Big Energy, does the same thing. And you can practice that. It'll give you a score. Like, you use great filler words or buzzwords, you have great eye contact. And some people get really excited and using that. But definitely you want to smile and you want to let the system know I'm very engaged. Because it looks a lot at body language too, right? So if I'm slouching in the chair and my voice sounds like this, then I probably don't seem I'm being really genuine or excited about the role. Don't want to be overly excited either and just be like, yay, this is the best position I've ever had. And it's like, okay, now you're doing too much. And also with eye contact, we're not having FaceTime with grandma, so we can't look down at the screen. We have to look at the camera, which is uncomfortable because I want to know what I'm looking at on the screen, right? And usually the camera is not in the same position as what I'm looking at on the screen. But it gives the hiring manager a score and says, okay, and I don't know what that score is for different companies. So let's just pretend like everybody that has at least a 60 or higher gets sent to the hiring manager and says, okay, these 75 people took this AI interview, but only 10 scored above 70. So you should consider these people. And maybe that's when they start digging a little bit deeper into the resume, or if it's required, a cover letter, and start contacting people. So practice with Big Interview. You've got a packet in there. It's 3 pages long of how do you go into Handshake. You put in your code, you practice Big Interview, and there's also learning lessons in there. So when you're like, Felicia, I don't know exactly how to answer that tell me about myself question, there's a video in there that breaks it down. So look at those lessons. That might be helpful for tomorrow. You pop in there and let you see. All right. So has anybody had someone call you on the phone and start asking you questions about an application you submitted? What was your experience when you answered the phone? You're thinking, I should have answered the phone. But past that point, what were your thoughts?
Felt easier than a regular interview. So didn't have to like focus on the photo, like you're looking at like focus on the photo.
So it was easier because it didn't matter how you were dressed, you didn't have to make eye contact. Okay.
And like it didn't matter where I was. I feel like I could like give more genuine answers.
Okay. Now, was your phone interview planned or they just happened to call you?
Planned.
It was planned. Okay. Sometimes they're impromptu. I notoriously, as a recruiter, called people after dinner because I had to hire people. I had to hire so many, right? And I was just like, that is so cruel. But hey, everybody else called you to sell you mops and a roof and new windows. I called you to figure out if you would leave the company you're with and come work for my company because I had to hire people that were in executive or higher level positions, right? So sometimes they answered the phone and you can hear the dog barking in the background, the kids are screaming and running around. They're like, oh no, I didn't realize you were calling. So what I like to say to you all, whenever you go to submit, apply for a position, you are in interview mode. That means your phone, your voicemail on your phone needs to be appropriate. I've heard so many inappropriate voicemails where they pretended like they were there and they're like, oh, it's not really here. Click. I was like, that's not funny. And then if you don't recognize the number, don't answer it and you're on the shuttle or you're in the middle of class. Let it go to voicemail. I know it's, that urge, like, I've got to answer it. It could be grandma calling from another number, right? But most of them are scheduled and they'll ask a few questions, maybe 15 minutes or less, because that's their first round of interviews. And they're like, okay, we'll pass you on to the next round. They don't say that. Guess what you can do at the end of the conversation? What's the next step in the process? I'm very interested. So always claim it, right? Don't hang up the phone and go, I wonder why. Or call the person and go, you think they're going to call? I go, I have no idea. If I pull out my crystal ball, maybe I'll know. But definitely, ask about next steps in the process. And if they have contact information, send a thank you note. So definitely do that. All right. So in person, I talked about my 7-person interview here at the Career Center, which is very intimidating, right? And most important thing you've got to do, that eye contact. Usually everybody does a great job with that. One of the things that I used to experience in the recruiting role that was very distracting was people playing with their hair, their keys in their pocket, or constantly crossing their legs to the point that they almost fell out of the chair. And I was like, I wonder why they keep doing that. Because I know they're uncomfortable, right? So I love how everyone in this room is sitting perfectly still. Do that same thing in the interview, right? You don't have to sit like you're a statue, but don't play with things in your pocket. If you think you're going to play with things in your pocket, don't have it in your pocket. Put your phone on silent mode. Sometimes your phone will still ring or your watch will still ring because it's an alarm or whatever. Then cut it off. Right? Nothing more embarrassing than like, oh my gosh, the phone is ringing. Have water available just in case they don't offer water. And then try to remember some of the things people are saying because it helps you to think of your answer. So if they say to me, all right, well, tell me about yourself. Well, that's a great question. I'd love to tell you more about myself. I'm repeating the question. I'm showing active listening. I'm giving myself a second or two to calm it down. Again, my heart is beating fast. It's louder than the clock that's in the room, right? And then I want to remember the interviewer's name. Maybe I don't remember it throughout the interview, but I want to try to capture it and take notes, even if I'm not looking down at my portfolio. So bring paper with you because I want to send a targeted thank you note. I promise you, I've hired more people off of a thank you note when I couldn't figure out the top two candidates, like which one should get an offer. And then the thank you note comes through and it answers what question we had, or it says something additional about their experience. Or maybe you were too nervous because they were asking you the questions and you were like, I can't breathe anymore. I've been holding my breath for 30 minutes. And so you get to answer another question. Thank you notes are so vitally important. Probably everybody's had a Zoom or Skype interview because of the pandemic, right? So the question becomes, what does your space look like when you've had that Zoom or Skype interview? Is it in front of your closet where I can see everything that you have hanging or not hanging? Is it in an area where the sunlight is behind you and now you're dark and you're glow? You look like one of the marvels that's coming out of the closet or whatever the case is. And then you have the most appropriate camera where people can see you. Like, what's been your experience on Zoom? And maybe, have you had a Zoom? I'm assuming you have, because during the pandemic, everybody did. Okay. Yeah. And there are a lot of ways to have Zoom backgrounds, but be careful of that. I've seen people where they have a printed shirt on, maybe you have flowers or stripes on it, and then they pick a background, not realizing that also has stripes or flowers on it, and then all of a sudden you have this weird glow and you're kind of going in and out and you disappear. So be really careful of that. A lot of times it's easy just to blur your background. That's easy to do, or just have something that you feel like when you look on Zoom, have a more professional background. You can go on on Google and look under images for Zoom and find one that looks like an office building or something like that. Just make sure that it's going to be appropriate. But it's going to be really important to make sure you have it message on your calendar, you test the link. Sometimes people aren't using Zoom or Skype, they send you a different link. You definitely want to go in and test it. If you have to download something, I always encourage people to download it on your laptop and on your cell phone. Because I tell you, no matter what, technology will always fail you. So if you have it downloaded on both and your laptop, the cord, you got it that day, and the battery's dying, you have your phone. If your phone somehow doesn't want to connect to Wi-Fi, but your computer is, so just try to download on more than one device. And then use a career center. We have interview rooms that you can schedule. So if you want to have a nice, clean background, we just have a couple photos that we've hung up. You can always use that. Just schedule it. So if your interview is at 10 o'clock, I tell people arrive at 9:30. So that way you can get your computer set up, you can use the restroom, you can drink your water, you can get your paperwork laid out, you feel a little bit calmer. Even if you're going in person, you want to get there early. You don't knock on their door early, like it's 9:30, Felicia said arrive early. You ask the receptionist, like, where's the restroom? Especially if you take the subway. Oh my gosh, I get on the subway and my hair is like blown back. So I want to go look at my hair. I want to, my shoulder has an indentation from carrying the briefcase, and I want to fix my shirt. So you want to be prepared for that. So we talked about the group or panel. So what do you think happens if there's like 7 people in the room? Do you stare at one person or do you stare at multiple people? What would you think your answer would be? Multiple people. It's kind of like you have to look around the room, right? And you have to smile and chit chat, and whoever's asking a question, you definitely do that. Sometimes with interviews, they may give you a test. You come in and like, oh, especially if you're, for example, a journalist and you're going to be doing social media. Okay, well, we're going to give you this article. Let me see you write 3 different things that's for Twitter versus an article for the web versus a press release. And you're like, oh, wow, I didn't really expect it. All right. And then sometimes you're sharing those documents. When you have it in person, whether it's group or panel, you can always ask them, and we forget this because we're so excited for the interview, or we're nervous, or both. How many people should I expect to meet with tomorrow, since you said it's a group session, and are you able to share their names? surprisingly, more people will share the names. Guess what you can do the night before? Check them out on LinkedIn. See who they are. And maybe connect your story to some of their experiences. Like, oh, not in a creepy way. Like, oh, I saw you at the grocery store last night. I followed you on Instagram. That would be a little uncomfortable. But on LinkedIn, we have similar experience. You graduated from AU. It's amazing. And then you can connect it. That helps you calm down a little bit. And if they say they have 5 people, bring 6 resumes. Who's the 6th person that gets the resume? That's you. Right? Because sometimes we have a moment we're nervous. You're like, oh, is it still my resume? I have it right here. You're not letting them know that you're reading it, although I told you that you're kind of reading like right here, like halfway down. This is what I did in this experience. So have that document with you. So some companies, especially if it's a company that does a case study we mentioned before, they'll have a Super Saturday event. So the company that I worked for, we would bring in, because we recruited from 40 different universities, which is a lot of universities. I was responsible for 5. And they would go to their first and second round of interviews on the campus. We then would bring them to one of our headquartered locations. We had 3 different main offices for Super Saturday. So they would get a chance to work on a case study. Sometimes they did back-to-back interviews. They would meet with people from different practice areas because there was flexibility going to different practice areas. So that's kind of what Super Saturday is. You get a chance to meet people. And when I went through the interview with that same company, I was in panel interviews as well. It was like a Super Saturday event, but just with me. And they also interviewed me over lunch. So what do you think you do if you have an interview? They said, we're going to take you to lunch. You're thinking, great. I've been interviewed for 4 hours straight. I need a break. And they're like, I'm going to join you for lunch. What do you all think you order for lunch? And I know that's so random that you think it's random. Or what do you not order for lunch?
Nothing messy or like smelly maybe.
Nothing I have to chew for a long time. I don't care how amazing it is. That is not the day I'm ordering steak. Number 1, I don't know how expensive it is. I don't want them to hate me. And number 2, I don't want to have to go through 5 or 6 chews, because a lot of times during those Super Saturday events or those back-to-back panel interviews, they're just hitting you with a lot of questions back-to-back. You're like, clearly I'm not going to get a chance to be full. I'm just going to get little bites. So I wouldn't order anything messy. Spaghetti and meatballs is not the thing I'm having that day. Definitely don't have any alcohol. So definitely stay away from that. But a lot of times, the Super Saturday event, you'll get a chance to meet alumni. They'll be like, oh, we have some people here from American University, and what other university other people graduated, and they'll meet and greet you. They'll have sometimes food or whatever the event is. Remember earlier I told you when you actually submit your resume, you are a candidate. When you go to any type of interview process or Super Saturday event, you are interviewing and being considered the moment you leave your house. You know why that is? Anybody you interact with could be the person that you're interviewing with. So here's an example. I was at University of Florida one day. Flight was late. My booth display, because I had to do a presentation that night, was lost. I'm filling out the airport form. I ran into the office. They gave me a parking pass. I'm driving around the parking lot. There's 1 space left. I go to get in the space. The gentleman cut me off, parked, and gave me the world's dirtiest look. I had to go park at another lot, walk up the hill, get into the interview room. Guess who my first interview person was? The guy who cut me off in the parking lot and gave me the dirty look. When I interviewed with the previous company before I came to AU, I felt all special. They were like, we're going to fly you to New York. We're going to have a driver pick you up. And we're going to bring you to our offices in Connecticut, which is a really long ride from New York to Connecticut, wasn't Connecticut. And then they went through the interview process. And then when I took other people through that process, I realized they brought everybody into the room, from the driver to the receptionist to the alumni. And they were like, give us some feedback. How did that person interact with you? Well, the receptionist said they were rude to me. They were on the phone, having important conversations. They actually make a copy, make eye contact. And I was like, wow. So that's why I say, this is not to scare you, just to let you know that you're a candidate from the moment you submit a resume. And the day of the interview, you're interviewing from the moment you leave your house. So be careful about what you tweet and what you say. So professional attire has changed over the years. It's really hard to determine what's professional attire that's appropriate for you, what's business casual. But what's most important is that your outfit should be appropriate, right? So you shouldn't have an outfit where you're like, I didn't iron this. I know my mother would just scream at me. She's always a big person for ironing. I'm like, I threw it in the dryer for 5 minutes. It looks great. right? That's not the case. Sometimes look on their website, see how they're dressed. I also worked in production, that's behind the scenes. So it would look really weird if I came in a suit and they're all in shorts and t-shirts because in TV production, you're on the floor, you're pulling wires, you're doing all kind of things. Now I'm not gonna come in shorts. I'll be in business casual, which is more like khakis, not jeans, and a nice shirt because I don't want to be underdressed and not be considered. So when you're in person, it's really hard to figure out like what is appropriate. So if you want to ask them, like, hey, you know what, would it be uncomfortable if I came in a suit or should I dress in more business casual? And they're happy to answer that question. And you're thinking like, okay, Felicia, so I should have these questions. Probably like on a note card somewhere if you're considering things for interviews. How many people will be in the interview? What are their names? And what's the best way to dress? Of course, you have to know the address. So definitely confirm the address. Sometimes companies have more than one location. Like, I want to confirm that location. There's nothing worse. And this has happened. I'm not ashamed to say this. I went to the wrong office for a main PR firm. They moved. And they didn't tell me they moved. So I got off the train. I go to the building and they're not there. But luckily, I was 45 minutes early and I was able to get to the next location because I don't trust DC Metro. I mean, New York Metro. But that's embarrassing. So I mentioned Big Interview. Has anybody used our tool before in Handshake? Fantastic. Did you look at the lessons or did you practice?
I did the practice. It was like I had to do for case we one.
Okay. So what did you think about the tool?
That was very interesting. I never like experienced anything before. I was like more. I think the entire time was more focused on satisfying the requirements attitude for the class than actually practicing.
And that's okay. At the time that it's a requirement for a class, and by the way, we talk to professors go, this would be a great assignment if you really want to get them involved. So blame all of us to make sure you're prepared. But I love the fact that you at least were introduced to the tool. So let's all give a hand clap. So it's fantastic. But it isn't a live person. It's pre-recorded. I told you can do the AI. Unlike real life, when you see these interview questions, you already know what they are, right? You're not going to get that in an interview setting. And when you record it, you can look at it and go, oh, I didn't get the right answer. Oh, I didn't like my eye contact. My voice inflection, I didn't sound excited. I get to re-record it. Right? So you can get it practice any way you want to. Right underneath where it says learn, way up here at the top, that's where you see those different videos. So please take a look at Big Interview. And that will be helpful. And that's the code that you register with. That's in your packet as well. Practice that. Look at the lessons, whatever makes sense for you. If you only have time to answer one or two questions, practice with those one or two questions. You can do interview roulette, you can do behavioral, you can do open-ended, you can pick whatever type of questions you want, and it'll be saved under your videos. If you really want some feedback, schedule time with your career advisor. When you go into Handshake, your student's one of your advisor. Schedule, say, interview prep or interview follow-up. This is one of the systems that we can't access without you sending it to us. You'll have to send the questions to the actual career advisor and go, I would love your feedback on this. Or you can do a mock interview with your career advisor. Either way, you don't want the interview that you're trying to get the job for to be the first time you're practicing. So that's where it gives you the AI feedback I talked about. Not only will it listen to your pace of speech. I know sometimes I tend to speak fast and I have to remind myself to slow down. But the filler words, it will count. So if you say and way too much, it'll listen for vocabulary that you're using that they feel like they've ranked as this is great for this level position, entry level, mid level. And it also will listen to how many times you like pause and things like that too. So it'll give you a score. It gives it in colors, right? So it tells something a little bit easier than you're a 1, 2, or 3. And there's a lot of great benefits to help build your answers too, because you'll listen to what that person has in there. And you're like, oh, that sounds great. This is what I would add to that response. So you can definitely personalize it. So does anybody have a LinkedIn account? Have LinkedIn? Perfect. Did you know that there is a button on LinkedIn that says LinkedIn Learning and has all these amazing tools where the videos could be 1 hour, 3 hours, but they break them down into different sessions. So I have on there right now, interviewing techniques is 1 hour, 17 minutes. Nobody's going to watch a whole hour, 17 minutes if they only want to know about how should I direct? So they have the videos broken down to 5-minute sessions. And I'm a visual learner, so I love the fact they have video, but sometimes I also go through the transcript because it has the notes. So I can copy and paste it, especially if I'm doing a presentation. Now, there's only one trick, and that's in your packet as well. You do need to go into the library database, log in, Aladdin, go down to the database, select L for LinkedIn Learning and connect it to your account. If you try to click on LinkedIn Learning first, they're going to try to charge you and then you'll be upset. And I'll be like, I told you to go through the library database. You don't have to pay that money. So AU's already paid for you. So I went through and I picked some of the questions that are there. You'll get the slide deck. We also have amazing videos from previous presentations that my colleagues have done. So if you want to go through those videos, you can do that. It also has closed captioning. So if you wanted to kind of look at the notes and see what they were saying, definitely use that. So there's lots of ways to get interviewing experience. One of the things that will always happen, I don't care if you're interviewing for the first time or 300 times later, you're going to be nervous. I don't care if it's an entry-level position or an executive position, because you're trying to make a good first impression. You don't know what to expect, and you're hoping you do well. So these are just tools to kind of help you feel a little more comfortable in practicing with those. And what's another way to practice? All of our pictures are up here. Based on whatever your major is whoever you connect with. You don't have to try to read the screen. I apologize that it's a little bit small. But I wanted you at least get a face from Brian Rowe, who meets with S.T.A., down to my colleague in the bottom, Christina Sincere, who also is school communication. So you'll see that when you log in the Handshake. You've probably seen it already. If you've ever booked an appointment with us, when you go to Handshake, you say, I want to talk about a resume or do a mock interview. It automatically populates who your advisor is. And if there's more than one for the school, you'll see different options for days and times of people. So have you all used Handshake at this point to schedule anything with your career advisor? Oh, perfect. So that'll definitely help you with that. All right, with that, I wanted to see if there were any questions, things that you feel like we didn't cover. We can go into S.T.A.R a little bit more, but I definitely want to allow time for questions versus overwhelming you with too many slides. And then if you have any questions from here, I'm going to cheat and get some water. Like I said, be prepared. Did you have any questions or comments from the chat so far?
Not yet, but yeah, for anyone online, you're welcome to submit questions in the chat or the Q&A. I'll read them out loud so for Felicia to answer. So I think some folks may be thinking, I saw a hand go up quickly and then it went back down. So okay. Maybe they're thinking.
Yes.
Would you suggest a handwritten thank you when sent to their office? Is that creepy? Or is
so it's not creepy, but the US mail is slow. So we literally had someone to interview. It wasn't Christina, so I don't want to put people's name out there. They interviewed for a position in our office. They sat in the car in the parking lot and wrote up thank you notes and brought it back to the receptionist desk. It was like, I just want to leave these and I'll make sure they get it. So you can mail it. It could take a while to get to the person. They may have already decided. So it's okay to email a thank you note. So you just want to make sure, like, hey, can I have your business card or your email address? And you can write it down. If they're rushing out to a meeting, like, do you mind if I stop at the receptionist desk? Because usually they're walking out, thank you, it's good to meet you. Like, we don't want you roaming around our office, using our coffee machine. But you can say, can I stop at the receptionist desk and get the email addresses of the people that I just met with? So if you want to send a handwritten one, that's great. The ones that I have handwritten, if you ever walk past my desk, I have them hanging on the wall. Because I'm like, it's so rare to get a nice card, stationery that doesn't say you owe this money on this bill, or are you looking for windows? So I'm always excited to get thank you cards. But if it's in the middle of that process, I would send an email and the thank you card just in case.
We do have a question from someone online. There's a couple actually, so I'll start with this one. Do you have any tips on how to be more engaging? Sometimes I feel like the interview may not be as engaged or interested in the answers.
Ooh, that's a good one. If they're sometimes in consulting, I have to go back to the company I used to work for. So they meet somebody like me for the first round. I'm pretty silly and I'm trying to make them at ease. And then they go into my colleague's room and meet with them, who intentionally would have their feet on the couch. They would make eye contact. They would use their phone. And they were doing that intentionally to see how you would interact with someone who's a client. Because the client's thinking, I'm paying money for you to do a service. So therefore, I'm entitled, or I can do X, Y, and Z. If the person isn't paying attention, unfortunately, you can't control how they're going to react. All you can do is the best thing is your answers. Make sure you're still making eye contact with everybody in the room. Make sure you're following up with, repeating the question and sending a thank you note. But sometimes people are doing that intentionally, or sometimes they're bad interviewers. We've all had bad interviews. I've sat through too many interviews and thought, that's an illegal question you're asking me, or you're like the world's worst interview in my head. Never out loud did I say those things. But I think we've all had experiences of like, you should never interview people because you aren't good at this. So unfortunately, you can't control that. You can do your best answer, and it could be a test.
Okay. And the next question, how can one develop confidence before and during an interview?
Wow. So developing the confidence. I don't know if people still do this, but if you join clubs like Toastmasters or in your organization on campus, even if you aren't in a role like secretary or treasurer, ask sometimes, can I get up and introduce the person who's speaking tonight? I'm part of a trip that goes to New York and Los Angeles, and everybody's required to ask questions when you go to these site visits. And so unless you give yourself an opportunity to practice speaking in front of people in all different aspects of life, then you'll always be nervous in the interviews as well. So it's not just confidence during the interview, it's a confidence in I'm speaking to someone who I don't know, and I feel like I'm going to be judged. So how do I get into that situation where I can have a conversation? Even as a presenter, I'm standing here going, I wonder what they're thinking in their head. Like, did she answer my question? She didn't cover this. Oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. You're always going to have that constant, fear of like, what is it that I could be saying differently? Again, you can't control anybody else's thoughts, but you have to work on your confidence. So try to find speaking opportunities. And I tell people, even if they're a freshman, go to a job and internship fair. Even if you're not looking for an internship, practice going up, shaking hands with someone, having a conversation. We don't even mind if you practice with us. Felicia, I'm going to come in and do my elevator pitch, pretend like you don't know me, or I'm going to go into the interview room and we'll do an interview. So try to practice. That helps build your confidence because you're practicing the skill of communicating with someone, knowing it's a high pressure situation. And when we do mock interviews, we'll request that you send us a job description so we can pretend to be the interviewer. We're not going to make it easy on you. We want you to have that same experience. So hopefully that helps with some of the confidence, but I would join different opportunities, look for different opportunities where I can get a chance to speak in front of people because you're always going to be nervous. That's normal, but I can work on my confidence.
Absolutely. And kind of related and similar from the same participant, does your pace of speech matter? So some folks naturally speak with a slower pace of speech. Mm-hmm. This is one of the things Big Interview AI actually provides feedback on. So any tips for pace of speech? You have to slow down. I said earlier that I tend to speak fast, which is unusual because being a native Washingtonian, they say I have a Southern accent. I can't hear it, but people say I have a Southern accent. But I speak fast, more like a New Yorker at times. And so I actually have to record myself and listen to, okay, Felicia, slow down and speak slowly. I have the benefit of being a journalism major and was in front of the camera for so many years. And so it's constantly critiqued by my professors to say, you need to slow down. So sometimes you have to do like a counting meter. There's an app, and I can't think of the app right now. I apologize. There's an app that my trainer does, and it counts back and forth, right? And so you hear that tick tock. So if you're talking faster than that app is going back and forth, you probably should slow down. If you naturally speak a little bit slower, that would be uncomfortable to speed up. Usually people don't mind if you speak a little bit slower because you're probably being really slow in your response when you're thinking of something. You don't want to just stop talking at all. That would be a problem. And they were like, oh, we thought you were finished. They start asking a question. So you want to practice slowing down your speech. Maybe practice with a roommate, a parent, and say, okay, this is my interview. I want you to listen to my speed of voice and tell me, am I speaking too fast? If they're not familiar with it, pull a big interview in front of them and go, listen to this person asking the question. Am I using the same speed or am I speaking too fast? Because sometimes you don't even realize you're speaking fast. And I have a very large family. So not only do I speak fast, I often speak too loud. So I have to say to myself, tone it down. And I'm a mom of boys. So I definitely speak loud. It's like I have to figure out like, okay, this is a different environment, Felicia. Bring it down a little bit, slow it down a little bit. But it took time for people giving me feedback that I had to be open to. So feedback is going to be helpful to help you with your speed. And I do have a handful more online. Okay. So does anyone in person though have any other questions before?
They're like,
there's no pressure. I mean, there might be some that you were thinking of that are online.
Like, well. She has us enough questions in person.
It's true. Okay, I'll go to the next one then. And this kind of went off of Allison's question about thank you notes. So for a Super Saturday type of interview where you're meeting a lot of different people, Should you send thank you notes to everyone you meet, or is it okay to send them to folks that you connected with?
So the tricky part about Super Saturday, they don't always tell you who you're meeting with. And sometimes you're going from room to room or event to event. You aren't able to capture the person's name or the actual email address on your device or a document, right? So not only could you send a message to the person you connected with, if you get the information, send it to whoever your recruiter is or your coordinator, whatever their role is, and say, hey, I met with a few people today, because they know who you met with. Is there any way that you could share the list of people that I met with? Or if it's not, do you mind sending them this thank you note? Because one of the things that when we arrange Super Saturdays, we would say, okay, well, this person majored in this or majored in this, or from this school, we're going to sign up to this room. So we knew where you were going to kind of make a master list. But yeah, if you definitely connect with people and there's time, you can, say, hey, what's your email address? Or are you on LinkedIn? And I can message you on LinkedIn. So sometimes it's a challenge. So Super Saturdays can be really fast and tricky. Sometimes when there's a case interview or like a judging session, you don't even know who the judges are. You're just sitting in on the other side of the room listening to you present. And then they're like, okay, next.
Yeah.
So a little tricky.
And the next one, which could go long, but how do you respond to illegal or sensitive questions?
So what you can't do, unfortunately, is yell out, that's an illegal question, I'm leaving the room. I'll give you my experience and then I'll tell you what the law says. So I was asking a question because it involved a lot of travel. Did I have children or a family that I was responsible to take care of? And would I be able to participate in travel? So what I did was I went around the question without answering about children, because it doesn't matter whether I have children or family. What if I'm still flying? What if I don't want to travel? So what I said to them is like, hey, I understand this position. I saw the job description requires 75% travel. I'm very flexible to do those things, whether it's a planned event or sometimes it could be last minute. My schedule is pretty flexible, and I'm sure we would probably have a conversation around when it's the most appropriate person to go on the trip or who would include in the trip. So unfortunately, you can't say that's an illegal question and walk out, but you can kind of go around parts of the question that you feel like are appropriate to answer. But it happens.
Yeah. And then this one goes back to the engaging kind of question. So like you mentioned, sometimes right off the bat, the interviewer is not engaged with you as an interviewee. What are some tips to get interviewers to better engage with you? Sometimes you can tell that they just don't want to be there. So how can you maybe hope that they engage better?
So that's where small talk comes in to play, right? I mentioned how I went to University of Florida and that poor person took my spot. I knew it would be awkward. And I said, hey, you know what? I don't get to come to Gainesville very often. What are some exciting things you could tell me about University of Florida? And I have been to University of Florida a million times. Probably was nothing that person could tell me. But I knew that we weren't going to have a good interview session because they're all even thinking the whole time was like, I cut you off and gave you a dirty look. Like, yeah, you did. And then now you're going to be uncomfortable. So for you, it could be small talk like, thank you for coming to visit campus today. I'm not sure if you ever walked around campus or taken a tour of it. And because they could feel overwhelmed. So that same company that I worked for, I often was in 3 different cities in 1 week. So maybe I look tired or maybe I've been in the interview rooms all day long and I'm just completely exhausted and don't even realize my body language is screaming, I'm not listening. So bring them back to reality. Don't judge them and go, you look tired. That probably wouldn't be a good thing to say, but I would definitely look for small talk because usually that brings people back. Like, oh, I noticed on your key ring there's a picture of a Doberman Pinscher. Is that the dog you have? Like I wouldn't ask people, do they have children? Are they married? Stay away from personal questions. But if I see your keychain has a picture of a dog, it's fair game. Like, oh, I know I have the same dog. So it's timing and including small talk. And usually they'll kind of snap out of it.
Great. So we have 2 more questions online and just a few more minutes. So lots of questions about interviewing. It's a popular topic. How do you respond to a question about experience that you don't have?
So you can't make it up, right? If they said, hey, do you know how to juggle? I clearly can't juggle. So one of the things you can definitely let them know is that I'm willing to learn. So sometimes the skills are listed in the job description, which I call a wish list. Nobody has all those different skills. And it's been growing over the years because somebody was in that position for a while. They've been adding to it because they want something challenging to do. So you definitely could say, while I haven't experienced that, would you say, and you can ask a follow-up question, is this particular skill similar to, and maybe you could talk about transferable skills, because sometimes they have a proprietary system that they use, you don't know what it is, or maybe again, you have to juggle, you don't know how to juggle. Like, I've always really enjoyed the circus and I've always enjoyed some of the acts. Are there certain things that are aspects of this role that you feel like I could learn on the job, or I can go to training because I'm definitely willing to learn? That's what you want to show, is that you're willing to do.
Perfect. Then the last online question, what are some of your personal do's and don'ts for an intro or general opening question, like tell me about yourself?
Okay. So the things that I won't say, my age, how many children I have, whether I'm married or not. What I will say are things that I feel like are those skills that I feel like stand out for the position. So I may even throw some descriptors of myself. Like, I've always enjoyed a very challenging role where I get a chance to engage with people. So as you can see on my resume, my history has been in a lot of communication roles where I had a chance to engage with the client or I worked on certain projects. So the do's are something about yourself that helps personalize it. Like, I graduated from Howard University. My degree is in PR and journalism. Thanks to me, they no longer allow you to have two majors in the same school. So that you have to be outside the school. Maybe that person at ease. And then I start talking about my skills. But I don't talk too much about personal. I don't say like I'm the oldest of three girls. I have two sons. I don't go into those numbers, things like that. But those would be the do's and don'ts.
Great. That's
Well,
it
this
from
has
our
been actually
online
amazing. Thank you to my
time, yeah.
colleague, Emily, who's running two computers and a camera for the slideshow. So thank you, Emily. Thank you all for coming out this evening. You have your handouts. You can keep your questions if you want. And you go, oh my gosh, I was tortured today. And then if you have any additional questions, and they're just quick questions, feel free to send me a quick email. I'm Parks, just my last name, PARKS @american.edu. When you go in the handshake, you can definitely see who your advisor is and get a chance to practice, or you can use Big Interview. But I thank you so much for being here. And also thank you, Allison, for not only being a participant, but passing out the handouts and everything. Thank you all.
Yeah. And for everyone here in person online, you're going to get a follow-up email tomorrow. It'll include this packet, which you're of course welcome to share with other folks. And I'll link to a couple of things as well, like our interviewing webpage and the slide deck from Felicia's presentation. So thank you, everyone.
I know, use it with
being here.
you're an RA, you're an RA.